It's February 1989, a cold evening in West London. Diana is in the back seat of a car. She's wearing something simple deliberately. Nothing royal, nothing that announces her. Her hands are in her lap. One is still, the other is folded underneath it like she's holding something down. Ken Wharf is driving. He's her bodyguard. He knows her silences. He can read them the way other people read faces. And this 20 minutes of nothing, no small talk, no questions, just the sound of tires on wet road. This one he hadn't seen before. She'd been awake since early morning. She'd made a decision before breakfast that nobody in the palace knew about. Not her staff, not her secretary, not Charles. Where they're headed tonight is a birthday party. Camilla's sister in Ham. And Diana wasn't supposed to come. Nobody expected her. Nobody wanted her there. And Charles, who was already in that car beside her, had spent the entire drive trying to talk her out of it. She didn't bite, she just sat there, watching the road. In about an hour, she was going to walk into a room full of people who had quietly chosen the other side. She was going to find Camilla Parker Bowles, and she was going to say something out loud that she had been carrying inside her body for 8 years. Ken Wharf was standing in the doorway when it happened. He heard every word. And in the 35 years since that evening, he has said the same thing every single time he's been asked about it. He still doesn't fully understand what Camilla said back. If you've never heard this story told through the eyes of the man who actually stood there, not reconstructed, not dramatized, not filtered through someone else's agenda, stay with us, because this is the account of someone who was present, and presence changes everything. There is something that gets consistently misunderstood about that night. The version that circulates in documentaries and dramatizations tends to frame it as a confrontation. Two women in a room, one gaining ground, one losing it, a scene with a winner and a loser. That framing is wrong. What happened in that basement in Ham on a cold February evening was not a confrontation in the way that word implies. It was a woman who had spent 8 years being made to feel that her own instincts were the problem, finally deciding to trust them, out loud. In a room she had no natural right to be in, surrounded by people who would have preferred she wasn't there, with no one on her side and no outcome she could control. That is not a confrontation. That is courage of a very specific and very under-recognized kind. And the man who watched it from a doorway has spent 35 years trying to explain exactly what it was. Ken Wharf joined Diana's protection team in 1987, former Metropolitan Police, Royalty Protection Branch. He was selected for the role precisely because it required someone who could do more than manage physical risk. It required someone who could read people, who could anticipate, who could understand what a person needed before they said it, and sometimes before they knew it themselves. He was with her for 6 years. He drove her. He walked beside her. He stood outside doors and sat in the backs of cars at 2 in the morning. He saw what nobody else saw. His memoir, published in 2002, was the first book ever written by a member of the Royalty Protection Branch. He broke protocol to write it. He said afterward that he did it because the truth about her was being covered over, and he wasn't willing to let that continue. When Ken Wharf says something happened, it happened. He was there. And by February 1989, what he was watching in Diana, in her silences, in the particular way she held herself in the 20-minute drives where she said nothing at all, wasn't the grief he'd grown familiar with. It was something harder, something that had made a decision. To understand what Diana walked into that night, you have to go back to where it actually started. Not to the marriage, not even to the engagement, further back than that, to the bracelet. A few weeks before the wedding in July 1981, Diana was going through the gifts that had been arriving at the palace. Among them, a small package. She opened it. Inside was a gold bracelet engraved with 2 letters, G and F, Gladys and Fred, pet names that Charles and Camilla used for each other. He'd had it made as a farewell gift, sent to his former girlfriend in the days before he married someone else. Diana, in her own voice, recorded privately at Kensington Palace in 1991 in tapes she made for Andrew Morton, and never expected the world to hear, "I opened it, and there was the bracelet, and I said, I know where this is going." I was devastated. She went to her sisters Jane and Sarah and told them she couldn't do it. She couldn't go through with the wedding. They told her it was too late. Her face was already on the tea towels, so she walked down the aisle already knowing. And then it got worse on the honeymoon. Day 1. Diana noticed the cufflinks on Charles's wrists, 2 entwined letter C's. She knew immediately where they had come from. She asked him directly. He confirmed it, casually, as though nothing about this was strange. They're a present from a friend. So what's wrong? That was the first day of their marriage. Now here is the thing that people consistently get wrong about what followed. The version that has been repeated across decades of tabloid coverage, documentary narration, and casual conversation is that Diana was young and didn't understand what she was marrying into. That the truth came to her slowly, painfully, over years. That is not what happened. She knew before the wedding. She knew on the honeymoon. She knew when she heard Charles on the telephone in his bathroom one evening, his voice carrying through the closed door saying to whoever was on the other end, "Whatever happens, I will always love you." She knew. She had always known. What she had was not ignorance. What she had was hope. And hope is a completely different thing. Hope means you understand the truth and you keep going anyway, because you believe the situation might change, because you believe a person is capable of choosing differently, because you love someone and you cannot yet accept that the love is not enough. For 8 years Diana kept going. She had 2 sons. She had a public role that demanded everything she had in the formal sense, and often more. She had a marriage that was, behind its official presentation, something closer to a sustained absence than a relationship. And all of it, the grief, the eating disorder she developed in the week following her engagement, the self-doubt that had been installed and reinforced across every year, all of it traced back to the same source, the thing that had been there before the beginning and had never left. Her therapist had told her something direct. The only way to begin loosening what was consuming her was to confront the source. Not Charles, Camilla, because Camilla was the wound Diana could not name in any daily context, could not fight directly, could not address through any of the normal channels. The affair had no face in her ordinary life. It was just always underneath everything, invisible, constant, like a stone she'd been carrying so long she'd stopped noticing its weight. When the invitation arrived for Camilla's sister's 40th birthday, hosted at Lady Annabel Goldsmith's house in Ham near Richmond, Diana made a decision. She was going. Nobody in that house expected her. That matters. The party was full of Charles's circle, Camilla's circle, people who had watched Diana with the particular brand of polite contempt that old money and old loyalty produces in those who feel their allegiances are being disturbed. There was no one in that house she could call a friend. She said later, "Nobody expected me to turn up, but a voice inside me said, 'Go for the hell of it.'" She spent the whole day preparing herself. She thought about what she'd wear. Nothing performative, nothing royal, nothing that announced her before she'd said a word. She thought about how she'd walk in, thought about how she'd hold herself, and she made one private decision before she left Kensington Palace. She wasn't going to kiss Camilla hello. That might sound like a small thing. But you have to understand what it had meant across years of social performance, the careful greeting, the kiss on each cheek, the maintenance of a surface that allowed everyone to pretend nothing was wrong. For years Diana had greeted Camilla this way, politely, as though the bracelet didn't exist, as though she hadn't heard the voice through the bathroom door, as though the cufflinks on the first morning of her marriage had just been a small misunderstanding. Tonight, she wasn't performing that anymore. A handshake, formal, controlled. That was the line she drew before she even reached the car. And then Charles got in beside her. He knew she was coming. He didn't want her there. And for the entire 20-minute drive to Ham Common, he tried to change her mind, not directly, not in the honest way of a man who says what he actually means, but in the way she later described as needling, question after question, each one designed to create a thread of doubt she might pull on until the decision unraveled. "Why are you coming tonight?" Needle, needle, needle. She didn't bite. She didn't answer. She held herself completely still in that back seat and watched the road. Ken Wharf heard every question. He heard Diana not answer. He has never said much specifically about those 20 minutes. A trained protection officer knows when his observations are not his to offer, but he was there, and the silence Diana held in that car was not passive. It was someone keeping everything in its place until the moment it was needed. They pulled up to the house in Ham. Diana walked in. The room stopped. Worf described it in terms that have never changed across any of his accounts. It was almost like freeze framing a scene in a movie, the surprise that she'd even arrived. Conversations mid-sentence. Glasses paused. People turned. Nobody had expected the Princess of Wales, and now here she was, walking into a room full of people who had, quietly and over years, chosen the other side. She stuck her hand out to Camilla when she saw her. No kiss. The line she'd drawn that morning held. I stuck my hand out to Camilla for the first time and thought. Few got over that hurdle. She went upstairs with the other guests. She made conversation. She held herself together for about an hour. She did exactly what she'd promised herself she was going to do, and then she looked around the room. Charles wasn't there. Camilla wasn't there. Something cold moved through her. She didn't panic visibly. She didn't make a scene or pull someone aside loudly enough for the room to notice. She moved through the house until she found Worf outside, away from the noise. She pulled him quietly to one side. She said, "You've got to come with me. I can't find my husband or Camilla." Worf looked at her. He'd been reading her for 2 years by that point. He knew the difference between Diana unsettled and Diana at the edge of something. He said afterward that he couldn't say no. This woman was in some distress. They went together, the two of them moving through that house, away from the clinking glasses and the carefully managed conversations, down the stairs toward the basement. And there they were. Worf. Eventually, we found the prince and Camilla sat on a sofa in the basement of this property, just talking. Just talking. That's how he put it. Sat on a sofa, side by side with another guest nearby. Quiet, private. The kind of scene that communicates everything without needing to say anything at all. Diana looked at them, and she didn't retreat. That is the moment, right there. Because every instinct that had been shaped by 8 years of being told she was too much, too emotional, too unstable, every one of those voices would have told her to turn around. Go back upstairs, pretend she hadn't seen it. Maintain the surface. She didn't. She looked at Charles and the other guest, and she said it with a calm so complete that Worf said it must have been terrifying to be on the receiving end. "Boys, I'm just going to have a quick word with Camilla and I'll be up in a moment." Worf, standing in that doorway, I didn't know quite what Diana was going to do at that point. He watched Charles's face. He watched the other man's face. He watched them both do exactly what Diana had said they did. They shot upstairs like chickens with no heads. She could feel it above her, the panic moving through the floors, the conversation stopping, people realizing something was happening in the basement and not knowing what. The held breath of an entire house, and now it was just the two of them. Diana and Camilla alone. 8 years of a wound that had never had a face in any daily context. Now it had one. Now they were in the same room with nowhere else to go. Diana, I was terrified of her. Not furious, not triumphant, terrified. The woman who had just dismissed Charles and another guest with a single sentence, who had walked down those stairs without flinching, was sitting across from Camilla Parker Bowles, and she was scared. And she spoke anyway. "I know what's going on between you and Charles. I just want you to know that." No raised voice, no speech prepared in advance, no stack of accusations built up like evidence to be delivered. Just that, spoken quietly, directly, into the space between them. Camilla's first response was denial. "I don't know what you're talking about." And then something shifted. The denial dropped away and something more controlled came in its place. A pivot, deliberate, cold. Diana remembered it precisely. She said, "You've got everything you've ever wanted. You've got all the men in the world falling in love with you. You've got 2 beautiful children. What more do you want?" Understand what that sentence is doing. It is not an answer. It doesn't engage with what Diana has just said. It reroutes the entire conversation away from the truth Diana has placed between them toward a challenge about whether Diana's grief is legitimate given what she has. It is saying, "Look at your advantages and tell me again why you think you have the right to be sitting here." Diana looked at her. 6 words. "I want my husband." And then, and this is the part of the story that has never been properly reckoned with, Diana apologized, not for coming downstairs, not for knowing, not for any of the things she might have apologized for if guilt had been driving her. She said, "I'm sorry I'm in the way, and it must be hell for both of you. But I do know what's going on. Don't treat me like an idiot." Ken Wharf was standing in the doorway for all of it, every word, every silence between the words, and what he said on record to CBS News in 2004, 35 years before his most recent account, was this. Both of them were in the same room at the same time, Camilla and the Prince of Wales, and she took control of that. I recall both the Prince and Camilla being very embarrassed. She took control. That is the witness account. From a trained police officer who spent a career choosing his words with precision, from a man who was standing in the room when it happened, and then Camilla said something else. 8 words. The 2002 account is careful, measured. The account of a man who knows he is breaking protocol and has weighed every word before committing it to the page. By 2004, on camera, there is something warmer. He is watching Diana's story finally being told in her own voice, and he seems relieved by it. By 2022, 25 years after her death, he is not simply recounting anymore. He is bearing witness in a different register, one that carries the specific weight of having held something true for a very long time in a world that kept offering easier versions of it. And in 2024, 35 years after that February evening, the bewilderment about those 8 words is still there, fresh, unresolved. A man trained to read people, trained to decode precisely the kind of indirect statement Camilla made in that basement, and still he says the same thing every time. Still to this day, I have never really understood what she meant by that. He noticed Diana change in the days that followed. He watched it happen in real time. The quality of her silence is different. The way she held herself in rooms adjusted. Something shifted in the arrangement of her that he'd been trained to read and was now reading differently. He said, reflecting on that night, it was a defining moment in their lives. Because I think at that point this was an indicator the end was nigh. He knew it standing in that doorway. He knew the marriage was over. He just didn't know yet what Diana was about to become. 3 years after that party, the book came out. Diana, Her True Story, June 1992. Sold out across Britain and America within days. Her own words recorded privately in her apartment at Kensington Palace, handed to Andrew Morton through a trusted mutual friend because she couldn't risk being seen with him directly. That careful, that deliberate. That same year the separation was announced, and 3 years after that, November 1995, Diana sat in front of a camera at the BBC and said the sentence that stopped conversations in living rooms across the world. There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded, she said it calmly. No trembling. She looked at the camera and delivered it like a fact, because to her, by then, it was one she'd been living with for over a decade. But here is the thing nobody said at the time. She had already said the harder version. 6 years earlier, in a basement in Ham, to the woman herself. Face to face, terrified, with no cameras and no prepared statement and no sympathetic anchor to receive her answer. The panorama interview was historic, composed seen by millions. The basement was brave. Those are not the same thing. There is a photograph from the autumn of 1989, 8 months after that party in Ham. Diana at a public appearance, somewhere ordinary, the kind of engagement that didn't make front pages because nothing spectacular happened. She is leaning down to speak with a young girl who had been waiting in the crowd. The girl looks nervous in the way children do when someone famous comes very close. Diana is at exactly the child's level. She has bent all the way down to meet her, and they are having a conversation the camera happened to catch. Diana's hands, both of them, are open, relaxed, not folded, not held carefully still, not tucked underneath each other the way they were in the back seat of that car on the drive to Ham. Open. She doesn't look like someone who won something. She doesn't look like someone who lost. She looks like someone who has made a quiet, complete decision to be exactly where she is, occupying exactly the space she occupies without apology and without performance. That is the woman who walked out of that basement, the one who drove home in silence while her husband said nothing beside her. The one who cried through the night until there was nothing left. The one who sat at her desk the next morning, looked at her boys in their school uniforms looking straight at the camera, and wrote 2 words she would spend the rest of her life growing into. The photograph doesn't know any of that. But you do now. She recorded those tapes herself, alone at Kensington Palace in 1991. She handed them to Andrew Morton through someone she trusted because she needed the truth to exist somewhere in her own voice. So that one day, in whatever form, it would outlast everything that had been done to obscure it. It has. She called that evening in the basement one of the bravest moments of her marriage. She undersold it. Ken Wharf was 35 years old when he stood in that doorway. He is in his 70s now. Every time he is asked about that night, he returns to the same things without variation: the distress in her face when she came to find him, the confidence, his word, consistent across every account, with which she walked toward the sofa in that basement, the words she said, the silence in the car on the way home. And then Camilla's 8 words, and the question that follows him still. Maybe those words were calculated, a deflection so precisely constructed that even a trained observer couldn't decode it in real time. A way of saying, you have what matters, so your grief doesn't count. Maybe they were the only thing Camilla could find in a moment she hadn't planned for. A sentence grabbed from the air when the truth had crossed the room and sat down in front of her. Or maybe, and this is the possibility nobody wants to sit with for long, maybe they were genuine. Maybe in that moment the only honest thing Camilla could find to say was, you have 2 boys who love you. We don't know. Wharf doesn't know. He's been turning it over for 35 years and he still doesn't know. What he does know, and what he has said without variation every single time, is this: she took control. He watched her do it, and he has never left that doorway. If this mattered to you, if she mattered to you, hit the like button before you go. It helps more people find her story, and her story deserves to be found. Subscribe if you haven't. There is more of it to tell, and we are going to keep telling it the way it deserves to be told, in her own words, wherever they exist, with the people who are actually present. We'll be here when you're ready for the next one.